The control and command keys are the most glaring difference between Mac and PC. And that difference hits the most frequent action we perform: copy and paste. The muscle memory attached to these commands is the single biggest barrier to switching systems. It is the primary source of friction. You might think this is intentional, a way to lock people inside a walled garden, but everywhere else we see these companies trying to lower the barrier to entry. So why wouldn't one just copy the other's approach? After all, they steal successful solutions from each other all the time. Why was Windows physically incapable of copying the command key? How is this tied to the critical importance of this specific button for the system itself? And how is this symbol connected to safety rituals that go back 1,000 years? We're going to look at why shortcuts using Control are bad design based on a fundamental error, and how 50 years later that error caused a global epidemic of carpal tunnel syndrome. This is a vivid example of how design decisions lead to irreversible consequences. Why did I focus on this specific key? What makes it special? The reason lies in the history of its appearance, or rather, what its appearance signaled. Picture this. You sit down at a friend's computer to show them something. It usually feels a bit like playing Minesweeper. Everyone has different settings, different workflows. This means you're constantly afraid of breaking something. That fear, that misunderstanding of the rules, is a feeling that describes modality. It's a design term meaning the system has different modes where different rules apply. To know which rules are active, you have to constantly monitor the system's state. When the keyboard was just part of a typewriter, this wasn't an issue. There were no modes. Everything was single-threaded and linear. The trouble started with what would later become the legendary dissertation by Dan Swinehart, Copilot. Notice the design, the fact that it's Stanford, and the link to artificial intelligence. It was an interesting time. I included a link to this dissertation with my commentary in last week's issue of my free digest. Plenty of food for thought there. So Copilot describes a unique approach that triggered several revolutions and the complications that followed. Swinehart proposed a crazy idea: connect a keyboard and monitor to a computer and program it so that alongside the main calculation task there was a parallel control process. This allowed you to intervene in the program and control its flow in real time. You might ask, how could it be any other way? Simple. Before this, you gave the computer a task and it was fully consumed by solving it. One thread fully occupied. Until the calculations were done, you couldn't do anything else. If you've seen the movie about Turing's machine, The Imitation Game, you've seen physically what single-threaded looks like. Effectively, Copilot was a control system that always existed as an additional separate thread. Swinehart essentially invented the first digital, non-analog human-computer interface. And since ChatGPT hadn't been invented yet, you had to enter precise commands, and repeatable actions had to be mapped to specific keys. But infinitely adding keys to a keyboard is a bad idea. So modes appeared. In one mode, buttons type text. In another, those same buttons execute commands. It seems logical and convenient. But if you lose track of which mode you're in and press C, which stands for change, you might irretrievably lose data. This is modality. It creates tension, the feeling of walking through a minefield. Relax for a second and you lose your work. Why not just use Control for shortcuts from the start? Because it was already taken. Control was an old keyboard hack. Back at the dawn of the ASCII standard, it simply disabled certain bits in the signal, turning it into a unique code. So its capabilities were limited and it was already packed to the brim. The fork.
Well, I think our next guest can help us do that. Larry Tesler has joined us now. Larry worked at Xerox PARC. Larry helped develop the Lisa, and he's now the manager of the Future Architecture Group for the Macintosh.
The solution lay with Larry Tesler, an employee at Xerox PARC. Imagine you love your job. You invent new, unique solutions. You experiment. On one hand, having the freedom to do this makes you happy. On the other, management is skeptical of everything you invent. They don't stop you, but your inventions don't go into production. They aren't applied. Then some guys from a neighboring office come to visit. You show them your work, and they practically scream at you. Why isn't this released yet? This is a revolution. You could change the world with this. And you realize these are exactly the guys who will change the world. Because that guy is Steve Jobs. Not yet legendary, but already charismatic and supremely confident. While working on the GUI at Xerox, Larry Tesler had already conceptualized cut, copy, and paste. He understood these were the most critical commands for a computer. And that specific logic, cut, copy, paste, wasn't obvious. It required extensive testing and searching. That was typical of Tesler even then, believing in the long-term importance of his decisions. He was always thinking about how to make design future-proof. After moving to Apple, which happened literally a couple of months after that visit, he finalized the actions we use today, except they weren't keys. It was a joystick. From a technical standpoint, they were just gamepad signals, left and right. Apple did this because it was an off-the-shelf chip solution that was easy to embed into a keyboard. Larry was the world's leading opponent of modality at the time, so he coined the term Quasimodality. He invented the term and the description, though the essence existed before. Remember the control key changing the binary signal? Tesler systematized it. He created the rules. He determined that the most ergonomic place for copy, paste, and cut was that little island on the bottom left. And to make it convenient, Quasimodality would be activated by holding down the Apple key, the predecessor to Command. Yes, just like there are Windows keys on PCs now, in the late 80s, there were keys with apples, and that was a bad idea. To understand why, I suggest checking out a course from our sponsor, Skillshare. The course is by Edward Boatman, Icon Design Creating Pictograms with Purpose. I used parts of this course to prepare this video because it helped me tune into the mindset of icon design. My personal opinion, not bought by the sponsor, is that this is a genuinely good, useful course that I can recommend. It helps you understand how icons and pictograms actually work. It was important for me to find a course about the essence of design, which isn't that common, especially from someone like Boatman, the creator of the Noun project, a significant figure in our industry. That's what I like about Skillshare. You can study this course, watch a history of design course in parallel, and learn to draw it practically in Adobe Illustrator at the same time. Skillshare is a vast, diverse educational ecosystem. The first 500 people to use my link in the description or scan the QR code on the screen will receive a 1-month free trial of Skillshare. Get started today. Thanks for watching the ad. It helps me make more videos. Let's get back to Quasimodality being activated by holding the Apple key. The solution was brilliant. Everything was intentional. The command island is where the hand naturally rests. The finger posture is ergonomic. The thumb moves minimally from the spacebar, and crucially, no conflict with the terminal, where power users were long accustomed to Ctrl+C for interrupting processes. I want to draw your attention to the essence of this process because this is real design, inventing and refining concepts. It's a process that requires thinking, testing, and ultimately knowing a lot. I emphasize that last part. All the designers and engineers I know who have reached significant heights are people who love design but also possess deep understanding in other fields. So the Mac introduced us to the almost familiar combinations. Apple C, Apple V, Apple Z. Sounds silly. Jobs thought so too. But before we get to his reaction, let's deal with Microsoft. Microsoft had Shift Insert for copy and Ctrl Insert for paste. This was the standard set by the industry giant of the time, IBM. It was a manifesto of standards for developers to ensure software behaved identically across the system. Microsoft obeyed and implemented it. But users weren't happy. You had to lift your hands completely off the home row, interrupting the typing flow. How they failed to account for this, especially knowing Apple already had a better solution, is unclear. But overlooking something is one thing. Cementing a bad decision into a global standard is another. Criticism of the clumsy switching forced Microsoft to try and copy Larry's work at Apple, moving functions to that convenient island on the bottom left. But the main difference between Apple and Microsoft then, which despite Surface devices remains largely true today, is that Microsoft doesn't control the hardware. Although we have to admit their influence on hardware is massive, since Windows is the primary way people use it. But they had to work with what existed. Alt was the obvious candidate to replace the Apple key. But Alt was used for fast menu navigation, a feature that had just appeared and they didn't want to change it. Shift was out. People had already learned that typing with Shift meant screaming. That left Control. But Control was a terrible option because of a direct conflict with the terminal. In that environment, the combination Ctrl+C was known to everyone as the kill switch, the primary way to kill a process. Microsoft decided this was the lesser of two evils. They bet on the growing market of graphical interfaces. They left Ctrl+C as the kill command in the terminal but assigned the same combination to copy in the GUI. And just like that, they brought back the very modality that this whole shortcut initiative was trying to escape. Even worse, it became a lethal modality. People started accidentally killing processes in the terminal when they wanted to copy text, while copy in the terminal required a completely different shortcut. Usability hell. It might seem like Microsoft were the poor victims of circumstance, but remember, Apple had so little money and technical capability that they effectively resorted to embedding a piece of a gamepad into the keyboard. They faced the constraint, assessed the limitations, and found a solution. Windows quickly became the most popular system in the world. The awkward shortcut became the standard. Today, it's so ingrained, part of the most basic baseline, that changing it is 1,000 times harder than it would have been at the start. But it needs to be done. Even now, despite decades of habit for billions of users. Because this isn't just about convenience, it's about health. The pinky is our weakest finger with the worst coordination. From most hand positions, curling the palm to hit control compresses the carpal tunnel and stretches the ulnar nerve, leading to tendon inflammation. It's almost guaranteed to happen sooner or later if you repeat that motion constantly. The main indicator of a problem is the sheer number of alternative solutions. Software to remap control to caps lock, which is higher up, reducing the curl. Large mechanical keyboards where you can hit control with the base of your palm. It's still not great, you tense a lot of muscles, but at least it avoids the dangerous twist. Or hardcore solutions like the Kinesis Advantage, where control is moved to a thumb cluster. Eventually, years later in the 90s, the Windows key appeared, remaining a more or less useless waste of keyboard real estate. It's time to return to the symbol CMD, which, remember, started as the Apple key. Ironically, Apple, specifically Jobs, criticized it and cancelled it back in 1983. Yet 10 years later, Microsoft added the exact same button. Steve Jobs went ballistic. He shouted that designers didn't understand what they were doing, that there were too many apples on the screen. It was using the logo in vain, devaluing the symbol. Then comes the well-known part of the story. Susan Kare, who drew all the icons for the original Mac, found a replacement for the Apple key in a symbol dictionary by Henry Dreyfuss. The logic for choosing this loop was simple. The sign is abstract, pleasant, symmetrical, and easy to draw in a 16 by 16 pixel grid. In the dictionary, it was labeled as a road sign, a marker for a place of interest. Though I've heard Apple designers refer to it as a road interchange, that was likely a mistake. The symbol appeared on the keyboard and has remained there ever since. That is important. That is consistency. Only later did we find out it's a symbol with history, an ancient symbol called the Bowen knot. It's adapted from a Finnish word that I won't dare pronounce, lest I summon a monster from Alan Wake 2. I found this fascinating because until recently, before autosave became ubiquitous, another popular combination was Command-S, save. And it's amusing that ancient Finns and Celts carved this exact symbol on their homes to save themselves from evil spirits. This connection between ancient magic, soldered pieces of a gamepad, and our inflamed ligaments brings me to a difficult conclusion. I'm going to say something unpopular. In design, there is no such thing as just a job. Immersing yourself in engineering irreversibly changes your personality. To be a designer is to accept a hyper-responsibility that borders on anxiety. Why? Because when you do a quick hack for yourself, a zip tie holding cables under your desk, it doesn't matter if it stays there, annoying you for the next 10 years. But when you design an interface for millions, your temporary zip tie becomes their lifelong reality. The story of Control and Command teaches us this anxiety. You cannot act reactively even in small things. You can't do it just because that's how it's done or because of market pressure. You must always proactively try to understand the essence of the task and the consequences of every solution. The Microsoft engineers in the 80s weren't bad at their jobs. They simply solved a ticket under market pressure, ignoring the essence of the problem. And that choice locked billions of users into an ergonomic trap for half a century. Apple had the will to go a different way, not just to move buttons, but to separate the philosophy. Content is separate, commands are separate. This is the main burden of our profession. When you place a button or choose a shortcut, you aren't just closing a ticket, you are creating physical laws by which other people will have to live. It's easy to divide the world into bad Microsoft and good Apple, but that is a simplification. Microsoft has its own deep philosophy. It's just different. I spoke about exactly how their approaches to the user differ in the video, The One Feature Apple and Microsoft Refused to Steal. Link on the screen. Before you approve the next temporary solution in your mockup, ask yourself, are you building a bridge to the future? Or are you creating another cage from which your users will never be able to escape? Thanks. Bye.